before diving into these forgotten stories from history's darkest waters, where ordinary men faced extraordinary horrors that textbooks rarely mention. If you find yourself drawn to these hidden truths of our past, please consider pressing that like button and subscribing for more journeys into history's shadows. Share in the comments below where you're listening from tonight. It amazes me how we're all connected across continents and time zones, united by our fascination with these ancient tales of survival. Whether you're in a bustling city or quiet countryside, we're exploring together how our ancestors endured the unimaginable, finding strange comfort in knowing we're safe in our beds, while Thomas Fletcher faces the abyss. The morning mist clings to Bristol's harbour like a burial shroud as you make your way through the crowd of desperate men, all seeking work on the merchant vessel Santa Isabella. Your stomach has been empty for 3 days now, and the promise of ship's biscuits feels like a feast waiting to happen. The recruiting master, a man whose face bears the scars of countless voyages, barely glances at you as he scratches your name, Thomas Fletcher, into his ledger with a worn quill. Around you, other men shuffle forward, some missing fingers, others bearing the telltale limp of old injuries poorly healed. The dock stinks of rotting fish and human desperation, but beneath it, you catch the scent of tar and hemp rope that will soon become your entire world. The Santa Isabella looms before you, her hull black with pitch, her rigging hanging like spiderwebs against the grey morning sky. You don't yet understand that you've just signed away your freedom for the next 2 years, assuming you survive that long. The contract you cannot read, for letters are a luxury your station never afforded, binds you to the ship's master with chains stronger than iron. Your first moments aboard the Santa Isabella assault every sense you possess, as the boatswain, a mountain of a man called Red Jack, herds you and 12 other new souls down into the ship's belly. The ladder rungs are slick with substances you dare not identify, and the darkness below deck is so complete that you must feel your way forward like a blind man. The stench hits you like a physical blow, human waste, rotting food, and the peculiar sweetness of death that seems to seep from the very timbers. Red Jack laughs at your retching, informing you that this is where you'll spend most of your waking hours when not on duty. The cargo hold stretches before you, packed with wool bales and wine casks, leaving barely enough room for the crew to string their hammocks. You count 40 men already inhabiting this space that seems fit for no more than 20, and you realize, with growing horror, that privacy has just become a distant memory. The ship creaks and groans around you, a living thing digesting its human cargo, and somewhere in the darkness, you hear a man sobbing quietly, though whether from pain or madness, you cannot tell. The ship's bell clangs before dawn, dragging you from a sleep that barely deserves the name, your hammock having swayed all night with the harbour's gentle waves in a motion that left your stomach churning. Your fellow crew members move like the walking dead, their faces gaunt in the weak light filtering through the grating above. Morning rations consist of rock-hard biscuits that require soaking in stale water to avoid breaking your teeth, and you watch in horror as small weevils float to the surface of your cup. The veteran sailors simply fish them out and eat them separately, claiming they're the only fresh meat you'll see for months. Red Jack appears, bellowing orders in a language that seems only half English, sending men scrambling up the rigging despite the deck being slick with morning dew. You're assigned to holy stoning the deck, which means spending the next 4 hours on your knees, scrubbing wood with a block of sandstone until your hands bleed. Around you, the ship prepares for departure, and you notice how the experienced sailors move with a resigned efficiency, their eyes already dead to hope. The Santa Isabella finally leaves Bristol's harbour on the morning tide, and you experience your first taste of real sailing as the wind catches the great square sails above your head. The transition from harbour to open sea is violent, the ship suddenly pitching and rolling in ways that make your previous night's discomfort seem like paradise. Within minutes, half the new recruits are hanging over the rail, emptying their stomachs into the churning grey waters, while the veteran sailors laugh and place bets on who will last longest. You manage to keep your meagre breakfast down through sheer will, but the horizon's constant rise and fall creates a misery in your skull that makes death seem preferable. The bosun assigns you to the sheets, teaching you through blows and curses how to handle the thick ropes that control the sails, and your soft hands are shredded within the hour. Blood makes the ropes slippery, earning you more beatings, and you begin to understand that pain will be your constant companion for the foreseeable future. As England's coastline fades into mist, you realize there's no turning back now. 3 days at sea, and you've discovered that sleep is not a right, but a privilege, earned through exhaustion so complete that even the ship's violent motion cannot keep you conscious. The watch system means 4 hours on duty, followed by 4 hours off, but those precious rest periods are constantly interrupted by calls for all hands to adjust sails or secure cargo that has broken loose. Your hammock neighbour, a boy no more than 14, called Willem, hasn't stopped crying since you left port, and you want to comfort him, but lack the energy for compassion. The food has somehow gotten worse. The salt pork is so preserved it resembles leather more than meat, requiring an hour of chewing to extract any sustenance. Water is rationed to a quart per day, already tasting of the barrel's wood, and something else, something green and growing. You've learned to drink it without breathing through your nose. The veteran sailors speak of voyages where the water turned to jelly, where men drank their own urine mixed with seawater, and you're beginning to understand that every horror story they tell is preparation for what's to come.
Your introduction to true maritime violence comes not from pirates or enemy vessels, but from your own shipmates when a fight erupts over a stolen piece of biscuit in the dead of night. The darkness below deck transforms into a maze of flying fists and grappling bodies, and you take an elbow to the face that loosens 2 of your teeth, simply because you were trying to reach your hammock. The officers don't intervene until blood starts pooling on the deck, and then their intervention consists of flogging both the thief and the victim equally, their screams echoing through the ship as the cat-o'-nine-tails tears flesh from their backs. You're ordered to watch, to learn what happens to those who disturb the ship's discipline, and you notice how the experienced sailors' eyes go blank during the punishment, retreating somewhere deep inside themselves. The beaten men are thrown back below deck without treatment, their wounds left to fester in the filthy conditions, and you understand now why some of the older sailors' backs look like maps of scar tissue. That night, young Willem whispers to you about jumping overboard, and you find yourself unable to argue against it. A week into the voyage, the first man dies, not from violence or accident, but from a fever that came upon him in the night, leaving him delirious and calling for his mother until his voice gave out. You helped carry his body to the deck at dawn, shocked by how light he'd become, as if the sea had already begun claiming him before death arrived. The captain reads a few perfunctory words from a prayer book, the pages yellowed and salt-stained, before the body is sewn into a canvas shroud with a cannonball at the feet. The splash as he hits the water seems impossibly small for a human life. And within minutes, it's as if he never existed at all. His possessions are auctioned among the crew before noon, and you watch men bid enthusiastically for his spare shirt, still stained with fever sweat. The space in the hold where his hammock hung is already claimed by another soul, and you realize that death here is just another form of commerce. That night, 2 more men develop the same fever, and the sound of their labored breathing fills the darkness like a promise of things to come. The storm arrives without warning in the middle of your watch, transforming the relatively calm seas into mountains of water that tower above the Santa Isabella's masts. Your first indication is the sudden drop in pressure that makes your ears pop, followed by a wind that screams like all the demons of hell have been released at once. Within minutes, waves are crashing over the deck, and you're ordered aloft to reef the sails before they're torn to pieces. Climbing the rigging in these conditions is madness. The rope is ice slick. The wind threatens to tear you loose with every gust. And the ship's wild pitching means that one moment you're climbing vertically, and the next you're hanging almost horizontally over the raging sea. Beside you, a man you've sailed with for 2 weeks loses his grip and vanishes into the darkness without even a scream, swallowed by the hungry ocean. You manage to reach the yard and begin the terrible work of gathering in the sail while the ship bucks beneath you like a thing possessed. Lightning illuminates the scene in terrifying snapshots, men clinging desperately to anything solid, waves washing completely over the deck, the captain lashed to the wheel to avoid being swept overboard. The storm passes after 2 days of hell, leaving the Santa Isabella crippled and listing, having lost her foretop mast and taken on enough water that every man must take turns at the pumps. Your arms feel like they've been pulled from their sockets after hours of pumping, the monotonous motion becoming a form of torture as the handle grows slippery with sweat and blood from burst blisters. 3 more men were lost to the storm, including the cook's assistant, which means rations will be even more poorly prepared than before. The ship's carpenter works frantically to patch holes below the waterline, and you're sent down to help, standing waist-deep in the freezing, contaminated bilge water that sloshes with every wave. The stench down here is beyond description. Dead rats float past, and you realize that some of what you're standing in is human waste washed from the head. Your skin begins to burn and itch from prolonged contact with this toxic soup, and you notice open sores developing on your legs that refuse to heal in these conditions. Above, you can hear the officers arguing about whether to turn back or continue, but you know that either choice might mean death. 2 weeks after the storm, the first signs of scurvy begin to manifest among the crew, though you don't yet know the name for this creeping horror that starts with fatigue so profound that lifting your arms becomes an act of will. Your gums have begun to swell and bleed, turning the simple act of eating into agony, and you notice that old scars on your body have started to reopen, as if your flesh is forgetting how to hold itself together. The ship's surgeon, a man whose medical knowledge extends little beyond sawing off infected limbs, prescribes vinegar and harder work, claiming idleness breeds disease. You watch as the more advanced cases develop purple spots on their legs, their teeth loosening until they fall out during meals, leaving bloody gaps that make even water painful to swallow. One man's leg breaks while he's simply walking across the deck, the bones so brittle from the disease that it snaps like a dry twig. The officers eat separately, and you sometimes smell lemons from their quarters, but such treasures are not for the common crew. Death now stalks the ship openly, and men place bets not on who will die, but on what order. The doldrums find you somewhere in the endless expanse of the Atlantic, where the wind dies completely and leaves the Santa Isabella sitting on water so still it resembles a vast mirror reflecting the merciless sun. For 5 days now, the sails have hung limp as funeral shrouds, and the heat has transformed the ship into a floating oven where the tar between the planks bubbles and sticks to your bare feet. Water rations have been cut in half, then half again, and your tongue has swollen in your mouth like a piece of dried leather. The hold has become unbearable, the heat amplifying every foul odor until men prefer to risk punishment by sleeping on deck rather than suffocate below. Tempers flare over nothing. A luke perceived as mockery leads to drawn knives, and only the threat of flogging keeps murder at bay. You've stopped sweating despite the heat, a sign the old sailors say means death is measuring you for your shroud. At night, the stars seem close enough to touch, and some men swear they can hear voices calling from the perfectly still water. Though whether these are hallucinations from heatstroke or something worse, no one can say. On the 7th day of the doldrums, madness claims its first victim, when a sailor named Morrison suddenly begins screaming that his dead mother is calling him from beneath the ship.
Before anyone can stop him, he throws himself overboard, and in the perfect stillness of the water, you all watch him sink slowly, his eyes open and staring upward, as if seeing something beautiful that none of you can perceive. The water is so clear, you can follow his descent for what seems like forever, until the blue swallows him completely. That night, 2 more men claim they hear their names being whispered from the water, and the captain orders everyone tied to the masts or rigging when sleeping to prevent more suicides. The ship's dog, which had survived everything thus far, dies of heat stroke and is immediately butchered and distributed among the crew, its blood drunk warm and its meat eaten raw before the heat can spoil it. You find yourself gnawing on a piece of the animal's leather collar, trying to extract any moisture or nourishment from it, no longer disgusted by anything that might keep you alive. The youngest member of the crew, Willem, has stopped speaking entirely, his eyes focusing on something none of you can see. Salvation comes in the form of a sudden wind that rises just as the 10th man prepares to throw himself overboard, convinced that paradise awaits beneath the waves. The sails fill with a sound like thunder, and the Santa Isabella lurches forward so suddenly that several men are thrown to the deck. Within hours, you're making good speed again, though the crew that mans the ship now bears little resemblance to the one that left Bristol. Of the 48 souls who began this voyage, 31 remain, and of those, perhaps 20 are fit for duty. The water barrels are nearly empty, the food stores dangerously low, and scurvy has left most of you looking like walking corpses. Young Willem died during the night, so quietly that you didn't notice until morning, when his body had already begun to stiffen in the heat. You helped sew him into his canvas shroud, using sailmaker's stitches you've now performed so many times you could do them in your sleep. The captain announces that you're still 3 weeks from your destination, assuming fair winds, and you wonder if anyone will be left alive to see land. The fever returns with a vengeance, claiming 5 men in 3 days and leaving others delirious with visions that would be entertaining if they weren't so horrifying in their intensity. One sailor becomes convinced that the ship is actually sailing upside down, that you're all dead and sailing on the underside of the ocean toward hell. He spends hours trying to convince others, his arguments becoming increasingly elaborate and strangely logical in the way that madness sometimes is. You find yourself assigned to sick duty, which means trying to force water down the throats of men whose bodies are burning up from inside, while their minds travel to places you hope never to visit. The smell in the sick bay is indescribable, fever sweat mixed with vomit, excrement, and the sweet rot of approaching death. One delirious sailor grabs your wrist with surprising strength and describes in perfect detail the demons he sees crawling up through the ship's planks, their faces those of every man who has died on this voyage. You tell yourself it's just fever talk, but that night you swear you see something moving in the shadows that shouldn't be there. You wake to find the ship under attack, though not from pirates or enemy vessels, but from within, as the fever-mad sailors have broken free during the night and are now trying to set fire to the ship, convinced that burning is the only way to purify their souls. The dry wood of the deck, soaked in tar and years of salt, catches quickly, and suddenly you're fighting both madmen and flames, while the ship continues to sail through the darkness. One infected sailor has somehow gotten hold of a cutlass and is swinging it wildly, claiming he's fighting off angels who are trying to drag him to heaven before his time. You manage to help subdue him, but not before he's wounded 3 men, including himself, with a deep gash across his own chest that he doesn't seem to feel. The fire is brought under control, but not before it has consumed part of the food stores, including most of the remaining biscuits. The captain orders the fever-mad to be chained in the hold, and their screams and rattling chains become the soundtrack to your nights. You realize that the ship has become a floating asylum, and sanity itself is now a luxury few can afford. The rats, which had been your constant companions since leaving port, begin dying in droves, their small bodies appearing everywhere, in hammocks, in the water barrels, floating in the bilge water that you still must wade through daily. At first,
This seems like a blessing, one less pestilence to deal with, until you realize that whatever is killing them might soon turn its attention to the crew. The ship's cat, one of the few creatures that had maintained its health, is found dead with its mouth full of dead rats, foam dried around its muzzle. Within days, men begin showing similar symptoms: foam at the mouth, violent convulsions, and a fear of water so intense that even the sight of the ocean sends them into panic. The surgeon declares it a form of madness brought on by bad air, but you've heard stories of the foaming sickness, the disease that turns men into beasts. 3 infected sailors have to be shot with crossbows when they attack anyone who comes near, their faces twisted into expressions that no longer seem human. You help throw their bodies overboard without ceremony, and notice that even the sharks that have been following the ship seem reluctant to take them. Land is sighted on a morning so foggy that at first no one believes the lookout's cry, thinking it another hallucination born of desperation and disease. But as the mist clears, there it is, a dark line on the horizon that gradually resolves into cliffs and forests, the new world that has cost so many lives to reach. Of the original 48 men, 19 remain capable of standing, and of those, only 12 can actually work. The Santa Isabella limps toward the coast like a dying animal seeking a place to expire, her sails patched with burial shrouds, her deck stained with blood and burn marks, her hold echoing with the chains of madmen. You should feel joy or relief, but instead there's only a hollow emptiness where emotion used to live. The indigenous peoples who paddle out in canoes to meet you turn away quickly when they see your condition, making signs against evil and retreating to shore. Even they, who have never seen your kind before, recognize the walking dead when they see them. The captain, half mad himself, insists on anchoring in the bay, despite having too few men to properly secure the ship. The attempt to go ashore becomes another nightmare when you discover that your legs, after months at sea, refuse to support you on solid ground. You collapse immediately upon stepping onto the beach, your inner ear still compensating for waves that no longer exist, making the earth itself seem to roll and pitch beneath you. Several men vomit from the disorientation while others crawl on hands and knees, unable to stand. The natives watch from the forest edge, clearly debating whether you're demons or just diseased men to be pitied from a distance. The captain sends you and 3 others to find fresh water, but the simple act of walking through the forest is torture. Your scurvy, weakened body screams with each step, and you have to rest every few yards. When you finally find a stream, you all fall to your knees and drink like animals, the fresh water so foreign to your salt-poisoned system that it makes you retch, even as you desperately try to consume more. One man drinks so much, so fast that his stomach ruptures, and he dies there by the stream, finally finding the peace that the ocean denied him. Your first night on land brings no peace, as the ground seems to move beneath you with phantom waves, and your hammock-trained body cannot adjust to the stillness. You lie on the beach with the others, starting at every forest sound, convinced that each crack of a branch signals an attack from the natives or something worse. The fever-mad sailors, still chained in the ship's hold, can be heard screaming across the water, their voices carrying in the still night air, like the cries of the damned. 2 men desert during the night, simply walking into the forest and vanishing, preferring to take their chances with the unknown rather than remain with the ship. You understand their choice, but lack the energy to follow. When morning comes, you discover that insects have found you, covering your scurvy-weakened skin with bites that immediately become infected in your compromised state. Fresh food is available, fruits hanging from trees, birds that could be caught, but your body has forgotten how to process anything beyond ship's rations, and men suffer violent digestive attacks from eating normal food. Paradise has become just another form of purgatory. The captain's decision to trade with the natives goes catastrophically wrong when he offers them items from the ship, not realizing that some of the cloth and trinkets have been contaminated by the diseased men who handled them. Within days, you notice the native children, who were brave enough to approach, are developing fever symptoms, and their elders retreat deeper into the forest, but not before leaving clear warnings, human skulls mounted on stakes facing your camp. The guilt of bringing plague to this new land weighs on you, though you're too exhausted to fully process it. Your own recovery is painfully slow. The fresh fruit helps with the scurvy, but your teeth are too loose to properly chew, and your gums bleed profusely with each bite. The jungle humidity makes your infected sores weep constantly, and flies lay eggs in the open wounds while you sleep. 3 more men die not from disease, but from eating poisonous plants they mistook for food, their bodies convulsing in the sand, while the rest of you watch helplessly, lacking even basic knowledge of this strange new land. The rains arrive with biblical force, transforming your beach camp into a muddy hell, where standing water breeds new varieties of misery. The makeshift shelters you've constructed from sailcloth and palm fronds collapse repeatedly, leaving you exposed to torrential downpours that feel like being pelted with stones. Everything is wet. Your clothes, your food, your skin. And a green mold begins growing on anything that stays still for more than a day, including the sores on your body. The perpetual dampness makes your joints swell and ache as if filled with ground glass, and several men develop a rattling cough that produces blood-tinged phlegm. The ship, anchored in the bay, drags its anchor in the storm and smashes against rocks, opening new leaks that the skeleton crew cannot possibly repair. You watch from shore as it lists further each day, taking on water. The chained madmen in the hold, now certainly drowned. Their screaming has finally stopped, and somehow the silence is worse. At night, biting flies emerge in clouds so thick you must cover your face to breathe, and their bites leave welts that develop into tropical ulcers, eating away at flesh like tiny mouths. Mutiny comes not as a violent overthrow but as a quiet dissolution of any remaining order when the captain is found dead in his shelter. Whether from disease or murder, no one asks. His body is already bloated from the humidity, and crabs have found him before you do, their claws clicking as they retreat from their feast. Without leadership, the 18 survivors split into factions, some wanting to repair the ship enough to sail home, others insisting on walking inland to find rumored cities of gold, and a third group content to simply wait for death on this beach. You find yourself among those attempting repairs, wading out to the listing ship to salvage what you can, diving into flooded holds where the drowned madmen float with chains still binding them. The water is murky with decay, and you must feel your way through submerged cargo, your hands touching things that make you recoil even though you can't see them. Each dive leaves you weaker, the salt water making your sores burn like fire. But the alternative is accepting death, and some stubborn part of you refuses to give the ocean that satisfaction. The faction that ventured inland returns after 5 days, but only half of them, and those who made it back, are forever changed by what they found, or what found them. They speak in whispers of a city made entirely of bones, of natives who wear the skins of their enemies, of trees that bleed when cut, and ground that swallows men whole. One man's hair has turned completely white, despite being only 20 years old, and he rocks constantly, humming hymns from home while staring at nothing. They brought back food, strange tubers and dried meat of unknown origin. But eating it brings vivid nightmares so real that men wake up screaming about being devoured from the inside. You choose hunger over these visions, but others are desperate enough to risk madness for sustenance. The beach camp has become divided between those still clinging to sanity and those who have embraced the madness as a form of escape. At night, you hear them laughing at things that aren't there, and you wonder if they're the lucky ones, freed from the burden of awareness. The morning you wake to find yourself alone except for 5 others, the rest having died, wandered off or sailed away on a makeshift raft during the night, leaving only footprints in the sand that the tide is already erasing. The Santa Isabella has finally sunk completely, only her masts visible above water at low tide, like grave markers for the men still chained below. Your small group has stopped speaking to each other, communication reduced to gestures and glances, as if words themselves have become too heavy to carry. You've been here 2 months now, though time has lost meaning, and your body has adapted to constant suffering in ways you didn't know were possible. Pain has become such a constant companion that its occasional absence feels strange and wrong. A merchant ship appears on the horizon one morning, but when you try to signal it, your voice is so hoarse from disuse that no sound emerges, and your arms are too weak to wave effectively. You watch it sail past, the crew unable to see your small group from such distance, and feel neither disappointment nor hope, just a hollow acknowledgement that survival and death have become the same thing. The fever returns to claim 2 more of your group, leaving only 4 souls on this cursed beach, and you begin to suspect that survival itself is a form of punishment for sins you cannot remember committing. You've learned to eat things that would have revolted you months ago, grubs from rotting logs, seaweed that makes your stomach cramp, even leather from salvaged shoes boiled until it becomes soft enough to chew. Your teeth, those that remain, are so loose you can move them with your tongue, and eating has become an exercise in careful navigation to avoid losing them. One morning, you find one of the remaining survivors has built a signal fire using the last of the salvaged wood, but instead of signaling for rescue, he simply walks into it, his screams lasting only moments before the smoke takes him. You and the 2 others watch without moving to help, understanding his choice completely. That night, you dream you're back in Bristol, warm and fed, only to wake to the sound of crabs trying to eat your infected feet, their claws clicking against exposed bone, where the tropical ulcers have eaten through to skeleton. You wake one morning to find that another survivor has died in his sleep, his body already stiff, and you and the last remaining man must decide whether to bury him or save your energy for your own survival. The decision is made when you both lack the strength to drag his body anywhere, so you simply cover him with sand where he lies and move your sleeping area upwind. The 2 of you have developed a wordless routine, checking fish traps that rarely contain anything edible, gathering rainwater in salvage containers, and spending hours staring at the horizon for ships that never come. Your companion, a man whose name you've forgotten or perhaps never knew, has developed a disturbing habit of talking to people who aren't there, carrying on full conversations with the dead crew members. You don't correct him anymore, partly because you're not entirely sure they aren't there. Sometimes you catch movement in your peripheral vision that shouldn't exist. The boundary between life and death has become so thin here that crossing it seems less like dying and more like simply stepping through a doorway you've been standing in front of for months. The final survivor, besides yourself, dies not from disease or starvation, but from a coconut falling on his head while he sleeps. A death so absurd that you actually laugh, a sound you haven't made in so long it frightens the seabirds. You're alone now, completely and utterly alone, and the strange thing is that it feels no different from when others were here. You've been speaking to them all morning before remembering they're dead. And when you remember, you continue the conversation anyway, because the silence is worse than madness. Your daily routine continues unchanged, checking traps, gathering water, maintaining a shelter that barely deserves the name. You've started seeing the Santa Isabella sailing in the bay sometimes, whole and proud, with the full crew waving from her deck. You wave back, knowing it's not real, but no longer caring about the distinction between real and imagined. The tropical ulcers have eaten through to bone in multiple places on your legs and feet, and you can watch your own skeleton move when you walk, a living anatomy lesson that would have horrified you once, but now seems merely interesting. Time has become meaningless in your solitude. You could have been alone for days or months, there's no way to know anymore, and the distinction has ceased to matter. You've developed a relationship with a crab that lives in the skull of one of your former companions, having conversations with it that seem perfectly reasonable in your current state. The crab, you've decided, is the reincarnation of young Willem, and you tell it stories about the world beyond this beach, though you can barely remember if those stories are real or dreams you once had. Your body continues to function through pure habit. You eat when you find food, drink when it rains, sleep when darkness comes. The infected wounds no longer hurt, which you know means the nerves have died, and parts of your body have become numb territories you can see but not feel. Sometimes you forget you have a body at all, and are surprised to look down and see hands performing tasks you don't remember initiating. A ship appears on the horizon one day, or perhaps you imagine it, and you make no effort to signal it, having forgotten that rescue is something you once wanted. The natives find you during what might be the wet season or the dry season. The distinction has long since ceased to exist in your world of endless, momentous present. They approach carefully, spears ready, but lower them when they realize you're far beyond being a threat to anyone, including yourself. You don't run or react, simply continuing your conversation with Willem the crab while they circle you, their voices musical and incomprehensible. They seem to be debating something, gesturing at your exposed bones, your collection of skulls that you've arranged in a circle for company. The way you've been sitting in the same spot so long that your skin has started growing into the sand. One of them, braver or more curious than the others, touches your shoulder, and you're surprised to feel it. The first human contact in so long that you'd forgotten skin could sense another's presence. They bring water, fresh and clean, but your throat has forgotten how to swallow properly, and most of it runs down your chin. They speak to each other in hushed tones, and though you don't understand the words, you recognize the tone. It's the same mixture of pity and horror that you once felt for the fever-mad sailors. The natives carry you to their village, though you're barely aware of the journey, drifting in and out of consciousness, while your body experiences movement after months of stillness. Their medicine man, painted in symbols that seem to writhe in your fevered vision, forces bitter liquids down your throat that make you vomit up things you didn't know were inside you. Black bile, what appears to be seaweed you don't remember eating, and small shells that couldn't possibly have gotten there. Children peek at you from behind trees, fascinated by this creature that looks human but clearly isn't anymore. They've put you in a hut away from the others, and you understand you're in quarantine, though from what you're not sure. Perhaps they think madness is contagious, or perhaps it is. You keep asking for Willem, and they don't understand, until you make crab gestures, and then an old woman brings you the skull with your crustacean friend still living inside. This kindness breaks something in you that all the horror couldn't touch, and you weep for the first time since the voyage began, though your tear ducts produce only blood-tinged drops. Days or weeks pass in the native village, marked only by the rhythm of bitter medicine forced into your mouth and poultices applied to wounds that have gone beyond healing to become permanent features of your body. You begin to understand that the natives are not trying to heal you so much as make you comfortable while you die, a kindness you hadn't expected from strangers. Through gestures and drawings in the dirt, they tell you of others like you they've found, always alone, always mad, always talking to things that aren't there. They show you graves marked with European crosses made from ship timber, and you wonder if any are from the Santa Isabella's crew who deserted. A young native man sits with you sometimes, teaching you words in his language. Though you forget them immediately, your mind no longer capable of holding new information. He shows you his own scars from what you eventually understand was a Spanish raid years ago, and you realize these people have seen your kind before and still chose mercy. At night, the village shaman performs rituals around your hut, not to heal you, but to keep whatever curse you carry from spreading. The fever comes again, but this time it feels different. Less like illness and more like your body finally admitting defeat after fighting for so long. Your vision fractures into pieces, showing you Bristol's grey morning, the Santa Isabella's proud sails, young Willem's tears, the captain's bloated corpse, and this quiet village all at once, as if time itself has come undone. The natives increase their visits.
And you understand from their solemn faces that your end is near. They've prepared a grave already. You can see it from your hut's entrance, dug proper and deep, not like the shallow sand burials on the beach. An old woman brings you flowers every day, placing them around you until you're surrounded by colour you can no longer properly see. Willem the crab has died, and they've placed his small body in the skull, with ceremony, understanding somehow that this creature mattered to you. You want to thank them, but language, all language, has fled, leaving you only with gestures that grow weaker each day. The shaman paints symbols on your forehead with something that smells of earth and rain, and you understand these are meant to guide you to wherever their people go after death. In your final, coherent days, a miracle or curse occurs. Another European washes ashore, found by the natives, and brought to the village in the same condition you once were. Through the doorway of your hut, you can see him, skeletal and sun-mad, talking to people who aren't there, and you recognize the particular variety of madness that comes from months at sea. The natives bring him to see you, perhaps thinking companionship will help. But when your eyes meet, you both recoil. In each other, you see your own degradation reflected. The truth of what you've become made undeniable. He speaks in Portuguese, you in English, neither understanding the other, but both comprehending perfectly the story being told. He shows you infected rat bites that look like yours once did, and you show him your bones visible through tropical ulcers. It's a grotesque comparison of sufferings, a competition no one can win. That night, he screams about water horses dragging men under, and you find yourself translating his nightmares to the natives through gestures, having become fluent in the language of maritime horror. The Portuguese sailor dies within 3 days, his body unable to handle even the gentle care of the natives, and you watch them bury him in the grave you thought was meant for you. Through broken communication, you learn he was from a ship called Santo Antonio, wrecked further down the coast, and he was the sole survivor of 90 men. The natives seem unsurprised by these tales of maritime disaster. To them, the ocean regularly delivers broken Europeans like driftwood, and they've developed rituals specifically for burying your kind. You help them, or rather, you sit propped against a tree and point, as they fashion a cross from ship timber they've collected over the years. The wood is from different vessels, different nations, different tragedies, but it all ends up the same, marking graves of men who travelled across the world to die on this beach. That night, you dream of all 90 men from the Santo Antonio joining the 48 from the Santa Isabella, a ghost fleet of sailors marching into the jungle, finally free from the sea's grip. The rainy season intensifies, and your shelter floods regularly, leaving you lying in inches of warm water that you lack the strength or will to escape. The natives have stopped trying to move you to drier ground after realizing you simply return to the flooded spot, drawn by some instinct to remain where they first placed you. Mushrooms have begun growing on the walls of your hut, and you suspect on parts of your body that have been wet too long, though you can't turn your head enough to check. The village children have made a game of bringing you things, shells, colorful insects, pieces of fruit, placing them around you like offerings to a strange deity. You've become their living ghost story, the cautionary tale mothers tell about the dangers of the sea. Through the endless rain, you sometimes hear singing from the village, and occasionally someone will come to check if you're still breathing, always seeming slightly surprised when you are. Your existence has become so minimal that the difference between life and death is merely technical. You persist rather than live, a distinction the natives seem to understand and respect. A Spanish trading vessel arrives at the village, and the natives quickly hide you, understanding that your countrymen, or what you once would have called countrymen, would either kill you as diseased or force you onto another ship, a fate worse than death. From your hut, you can hear Spanish voices negotiating trade, and the sound of European language after so long is both familiar and alien. You understand some words, but they seem to belong to a different lifetime.
when you were someone who cared about trade and profit. The Spanish captain, through a native interpreter, asks about other Europeans, and the villagers lie smoothly, saying none have been seen. After they leave, the village shaman performs a cleansing ritual, and you understand the natives fear the Spanish more than they ever feared you. They bring you extra medicine that night, and the old woman who tends you makes gestures, suggesting the Spanish would have taken you to work until death in silver mines. The idea seems neither frightening nor relieving, simply another form of ending that you've been denied. Months pass, or what might be months, and your body continues its refusal to die despite having every reason to surrender. The natives have developed a routine around you, checking twice daily, replacing the water in your bowl, occasionally forcing thin gruel between your lips when you forget to eat for too many days. You've become part of the village's rhythm, like the rooster that crows at dawn, or the tide that rises and falls. New sailors wash ashore periodically, Portuguese, Spanish, even a Dutchman once. But none survive long enough to join you in your perpetual dying. You watch them buried with the same ceremony, the same cross made from scattered ships, the same resigned acceptance from the natives. Your body has developed a waxy quality, preserved by some combination of tropical disease and native medicine, making you look more like a religious relic than a living person. The children no longer fear you, sometimes using your hut as part of their games, running through while you remain motionless, a landmark in their childhood geography. The shaman dies of old age, and during his funeral rites, the new shaman, a younger man with kind eyes, comes to perform ceremonies around you that you don't understand but find oddly comforting. He speaks to you in a mixture of languages, native, Spanish, Portuguese, and somehow a few English words, telling you about the spirit world where sailors never thirst and the ocean is always calm. You want to tell him that sounds like another form of hell, that calm seas were when madness came, but your voice is just whispers now. He brings a mirror one day, showing you your reflection, and you don't recognize the creature staring back. Skin like leather, eyes sunk so deep they're barely visible. What remains of your hair, white as sea foam. You're not shocked or disturbed. This face makes more sense than the Thomas Fletcher who signed aboard the Santa Isabella. That man was the dream. This creature is the reality. The new shaman nods as if you've passed some test and begins preparing what you somehow know are your final rites. Your end approaches with the same slow patience that has marked your entire dying, refusing to be rushed after taking so long to arrive. The village gathers outside your hut, not in sadness, but in witness to something they've been expecting for over a year. Children peek through the doorway, no longer afraid, having grown up with you as their village's living ghost. The old woman who has fed you brings a final meal, soft fruit mashed with something sweet, and you manage to swallow a small amount, tasting flavor for the first time in memory. The Portuguese words for last rites drift through your mind, mixed with English prayers and native chants you've heard so often they've become part of your breathing. As darkness falls, you see lights that shouldn't exist. Ship lanterns in the jungle, cooking fires on the ocean, stars beneath the earth. The Santa Isabella sails through your hut's wall, whole and clean, with the original crew waving from her deck, young Willem among them, no longer crying. In your last hours, time becomes fluid, and you're simultaneously in Bristol signing your name. In the storm's rigging, in the doldrum's stillness, and in this hut, breathing your last. The natives sing something low and rhythmic, a sound that seems to come from the earth itself, guiding you toward whatever comes next. You try to speak, to thank them, or curse them, or simply acknowledge their kindness, but only a soft sigh emerges. The old woman holds your hand. When did you become able to feel again? And her touch is the first gentleness you've known since your mother, whoever she was, in that life before the sea. The shaman draws symbols in the dirt around you, creating a map for your spirit to follow, though you suspect your soul will simply drift like it always has, belonging neither to land nor sea. Willem the crab appears in your vision, grown enormous, offering to carry you across an ocean that no longer threatens. And you accept, climbing onto his shell with legs that work again, in this strange dream of dying. The transition from life to death is so gentle, you almost miss it, like sliding from waking into sleep on a calm sea. The kind of calm you never experienced on the Santa Isabella. Your breathing, which has been labored for so long you'd forgotten it could be otherwise, suddenly becomes easy, as if your lungs remember what air was like before it tasted of salt and decay. The villagers continue singing, but their voices seem to come from very far away now. Or perhaps you're the one who's traveling. The hut's walls become transparent and you can see through them to the beach where you spent those months alone. To the Santa Isabella, still sailing in an endless loop around the bay. To Bristol's harbour where this journey began. Every moment exists simultaneously. And you understand now that linear time was just another illusion, like the belief that survival meant living. The old woman squeezes your hand one last time, and you squeeze back with strength you haven't had in years. A final communication between worlds. The shaman's symbols glow in your fading vision, forming a path that leads not to any heaven or hell you were taught about, but to something older, deeper, like the ocean before men named it. Your last sensation is the feeling of rising, not toward the Christian heaven you once might have believed in, but sideways, slantways, through dimensions that sailors' minds weren't meant to comprehend. Below you see your body, that tortured vessel that somehow carried you through impossibilities, finally still. The villagers are already preparing it with more care than you ever showed it while living, washing away the accumulated suffering, dressing it in clean cloth they've woven specifically for this purpose. You want to tell them not to bother, that the body was never really you anyway, just a temporary arrangement of meat and bone that the sea tried to claim and failed. But you're already moving beyond the need for communication, beyond the division between self and other. The other dead sailors are here, not just from the Santa Isabella, but from every ship that has fed the ocean its human cargo. They nod at you with the understanding of shared experience, no longer Spanish or English or Portuguese, just souls who learn that the sea makes everyone equal in the end. Young Willem is among them, no longer the frightened boy, but something luminous and patient, waiting to show you what comes next. The natives bury your body at dawn, in the grave they've kept ready for over a year, with a ceremony that blends their traditions with fragments of Christian rites they've learned from burying so many Europeans. They place items in your grave, not gold or weapons, but practical things for the journey they believe you're taking. Fresh water that will never run out, fruit that will never rot, and a small wooden ship carved by the village children. The cross they erect is made from the Santa Isabella's timber that washed ashore, identified by the Portuguese sailor before he died, creating a circle of connection you couldn't have imagined. The old woman speaks words over your grave in her language, and somehow you understand them now. She's telling your story, not of Thomas Fletcher, the failed sailor, but of the man who survived the unsurvivable, who proved that humans can endure beyond all reason or purpose. She mentions that you never harmed them despite your madness, never stole despite your hunger, and they consider this a form of holiness. As the dirt covers your body, you feel no attachment to it, only a mild curiosity about how long it will take the jungle to reclaim it completely. Years pass in the village, or perhaps no time at all. Death has its own calendar, and you watch other sailors wash ashore, some dying quickly, others lingering like you did, none lasting quite as long. The villagers tell your story to each new arrival who can understand, a cautionary tale and a strange comfort that survival is possible, even when it shouldn't be. Your grave becomes a shrine of sorts, not for worship, but for remembrance, where the natives leave flowers and European sailors, when they occasionally trade here, leave trinkets from their ships. The old woman who cared for you dies and is buried nearby, and in death you can finally thank her properly, though she laughs and says she knew all along you were grateful. The village grows, changes, adapts to increasing European contact. But they never forget the year they harbored a living ghost, a man who proved that the boundary between life and death is more fluid than anyone imagined. Ships still wreck along this coast, men still die trying to cross the ocean, but now their spirits have a guide who knows the way, who survived the unsurvivable and can teach them that dying is just another form of sailing. Your story ends where it began, with desperate men at Bristol's docks signing away their lives for the promise of adventure and wages, not knowing what awaits them. You're there sometimes, trying to warn them, but the living rarely hear the dead, and those who do dismiss it as wind or imagination. The Santa Isabella has been rebuilt with a new name, crewed by new souls who will learn the same lessons you did, though perhaps a few will survive to tell the tale. From your position between worlds, you see the grand pattern, how empires rise on the bones of sailors like you, how history records the names of admirals and merchants, but forgets the Thomas Fletchers who paid the real price. Yet there's no bitterness in this knowledge, only a vast understanding that every age demands its sacrifices and you were simply the one chosen by yours. As night falls over Bristol, over the Atlantic, over that village where your body rests, you finally understand that your suffering wasn't meaningless. It was the price of learning that humans can endure anything, survive anything, even when survival itself becomes a form of death. The ocean still calls to you, but now you're its master, not its victim, sailing forever on winds that no living person can feel, free at last from the prison of flesh and the tyranny of hope. As your eyes grow heavy and your breathing deepens, let Thomas Fletcher's impossible journey remind you of your own comfortable bed, your clean water that flows at a touch, your food that never crawls with weevils. The horrors of the 1400s maritime world fade into history, leaving you safe in the present, where scurvy is just a word in medical textbooks, and the ocean can be crossed in hours, not months. Consider that of the tens of thousands who took to the seas in those brutal centuries. Most died nameless and forgotten. Their stories dissolved into the salt water that claimed them. They signed contracts they couldn't read, trusted ships that couldn't withstand storms, and ate food that killed them as surely as drowning. Yet they went anyway, driven by desperation or dreams, becoming the forgotten foundation upon which our modern world was built. Tonight, as you drift towards sleep, you're free from the wooden prison of a ship's hold, the constant motion of waves, the taste of rotting meat and stale water. Your body knows no scurvy, your mind no isolation of endless ocean, your spirit no slow dissolution into madness. The ghosts of those sailors have long since made their peace with the sea, and now they offer you the gift of peaceful rest, knowing that you'll wake to a world they could never have imagined, but somehow helped create through their sacrifice. Sleep now and dream of calm seas and safe harbors, of fresh water and wholesome food, of home always waiting just beyond the horizon.